I was fortunate enough to be, I suppose you call it a bit more confidence. I'd have a bit more confidence in myself, but it sounds crazy when you compare myself to Johnny Wilkinson, saying I'm more confident than he is, and he's 10 times the player I was.
What is up, everyone? Welcome back to Total Sport, and today we are joined by our first rugby-related guest ever. So this is a big moment for me because I've never been brought up with rugby, but over the years I've been growing more as a fan. Today we're joined by former England international George Chuter. How are you, mate?
Yeah, very well, thanks, Chris. How are you?
I'm good. Doing well. You obviously connected with you via Paul Aldred. If you haven't seen that video, go watch it. It's very, very interesting to do with mental health, bat making, that kind of stuff. Really, really good. But so George, obviously I'm coming into rugby a little bit later than obviously you were when you were younger. So were you always into it, and was it something that your family sort of?
I think probably by today's standards, I was relatively late to the game. I didn't start playing rugby until I was 12 years old. I grew up in South London, very sort of football-dominated area. No real rugby teams or rugby schools in the area. And my family wasn't really into rugby at all. My dad played a little bit when he was a kid, but he was a cricketer mainly. So yeah, played a lot of cricket throughout the year, indoor cricket during the winter, and wasn't really into football. So I never got exposed to that. And then I went to a rugby playing school when I was 12 years old, and first sort of game session on a Wednesday afternoon, they were sort of chucking a rugby ball around, and the group of us were doing all right because we could catch and throw through cricket or whatever. So okay, you guys, you're over there, you're going to go and play some rugby. And that was it really. And then got split up. The tall blokes, you're a second row. Quick guys, you're a winger. George, you're short and fat, you'll be in the front row. And that's how it started, and didn't really change for the next sort of 25 years. So yeah, I mean, relatively late. There's no academies, no sort of player pathways back then. And as I said, the area I grew up in, there was just no rugby at all. So sort of fell into it by chance, really.
Yeah. So I was going to say, was it always destined for you to be in the front row? Were there any sort of, were you ever thinking, oh, maybe I can push back into the second row and become a winger, you know?
Yeah. Well, I think once I started a couple of games at prop when I was in my first two games, and then moved to hooker because I was slightly smaller than some of the other guys. And that was it. And actually, it suited me. I was never going to be tall enough to play in the second row. Probably not sort of quick enough to play in the back row either. Although I did play some back row for my club when I was sort of 18, 19, just because we had a couple of guys who could play hooker as well. So I said I'd sort of have a run around in the back row. It's a lot easier playing in the back row. But no, other than that, all my representative stuff from the age of 15, 16 onwards was played at hooker. And obviously that's where I spent my whole professional career as well. So I think just the position suited me, and I think I had the skills in terms of things like throwing and that, again, probably from the background in cricket, I had the ability to sort of work on that and be pretty good at that. So yeah, it just sort of suited me, that position.
Yeah. So when did you realise, obviously you said you were a late bloomer in that respect. So when did you realise maybe you could go on and make a career out of it?
Well, again, sounding like an old dinosaur, the game didn't go professional until 1995, and I started playing in 1987 at school. And there was no career in rugby. You could go and play rugby. Obviously, you could be a lawyer or a teacher or an architect or whatever and do rugby on the side, and you could play for England as well, which is what they all did at the time. They all had full-time jobs, and that's what I wanted to do. When I started playing rugby, I was like, actually, I enjoy this. The rugby was on TV. There was very limited rugby on TV back then, 5 Nations as it was. And there were highlights on a Sunday, an hour's highlight show, a rugby special on a Sunday, and that was it. So it wasn't a huge amount of rugby thrown at you, but those England games were fantastic to watch on TV. And I thought pretty quickly, I was like, actually, I want to play for England. I'd love to be running out at Twickenham, running out at Parc des Princes in Paris and Lansdowne Road, all these great places, Murrayfield, Cardiff. That's what I wanted to do. So I think probably wanted to be a teacher. That was probably the area I was going into as a career. But yeah, I wanted to play as high a level as possible rugby, which would involve playing for something like Harlequins or Richmond at the time, one of those London clubs. So that was, and in terms of being a career, that didn't happen until, I say, 1995, Christmas 95, it went professional. I was at university at that time, and I got an offer to play for Saracens in 1996, in the summer of '96, coming along to pre-season training. You couldn't really do both then. Back then, it was either rugby or university. And I dropped out of uni and signed a professional contract, and and that was it. The next 18 years, I was a professional rugby player. So again, I sort of fell into rugby at the beginning and fell into professional rugby when it started out as well. So it's sort of relatively good timing.
Yeah,
it wasn't planned that way at all.
Absolutely. So talk to me about when you actually got the call for the come along to the pre-season at Saracens. Was it something that you'd either been expecting or building up to?
No, not at all. Again, I'm from South London. Saracens were North London. Didn't really know anything about them. They were one of the sort of top 12 or 13. There wasn't even leagues at this time. This is the first sort of couple of years of leagues in, I think, 86, 87 when the first league season started, and Saracens are up there and thereabouts. But they were North London. They were well out of my sort of line of sight. I was more sort of a Quins and Richmond and Rosslyn Park fan. They were the closest clubs to me. So I was playing for London under 21s in 95, 96 season, and the coach there was a guy called Mark Evans, who was a headmaster as well, but he was also head coach at Saracens. Actually, not headmaster. He taught at Campion School, which is a big school in Essex. And he said, at one of the London games, he said, "Oh, do you fancy coming around for a bit of a run around in pre-season next year in June '96? This would have been." I was like, "Yeah, sounds like fun." So June '96, I got the train up, sort of training at London, tube up the end of the Piccadilly line, walked down to the recreation ground where Sarries trained, and found myself running around with Michael Liner and Francois Pinault, and actually Pinault hadn't arrived, but Philippe Sella and all these guys. And I was there for 2 weeks, just in pre-season, doing a bit of fitness, bit of rugby stuff, and they said, "Do you want to sign a contract?" And I said, "Yeah, nothing else to do. Yeah, why not?" and like I said, I sort of fell into a full-time job in rugby. So yeah, it was all very, very sort of, that was how it happened back then. Again, I speak to young guys now, and they're like, "Oh, what academy did you come through? What was your player pathway? Were there developing player pathways?" And I'm like, no, people didn't work that way. Schools obviously were quite big in the rugby scene. So if there were good youngsters playing the Daily Mail Cup or something like that, which was the school's tournament, they got spotted by clubs and got asked to come to training, just like I did. And that was the way it worked for rugby in that sort of time. And particularly me being out of sort of catchment of Saracens, being out of North London, it was quite unusual to sort of to be spotted by a rugby club to be playing in South London. But that's how it works, sort of very sort of haphazard and just sort of fancy that, yeah, why not? Yeah.
Excellent. So talk to me about when you first stepped onto the field for Saracens. What was the feeling that you finally made it as a professional rugby player? Yeah,
it was very strange. It was very strange. I mean, again, because it had not been a lifelong goal of mine, it had been something that just sort of cropped up. It was all a bit surreal. I always felt I could play at some point at that level of rugby, the top level of rugby in English club rugby. Because I played for my school's old boys team when I was sort of 17, 18. And back then we would be level 5 now. So we were one below the national leagues, which was a pretty good level of rugby. And back then there wasn't a huge gap between the top and the bottom because everyone was amateur. So, we used to have the Pilkington Cup, and sometimes a first division team would play a team from my level or the level above and below. And they'd be relatively tight games, and then the better players would win the game. So it wasn't a case of being in these days where the Premiership is a million times better than sort of level 4 or level 5. Back then, I played at level 5, and I was okay. I was pretty good at times. I thought actually I could step up here in sort of 3 or 4 years if my progression goes well. I could be playing in the first division. So it just got accelerated a bit by the sort of onset of professionalism, and I was able to train full time and sort of concentrate on rugby rather than having to worry about working and stuff. So once I got there to start playing, I actually felt quite comfortable. I'd been training, let's say, all summer with some of the best players in Michael Liner and Philippe Sella were great internationals by that point. They finished playing. They were some of the all-time greats. So I've been training with these guys. I've been learning from them. So I felt relatively comfortable. And as I say, it wasn't the huge jump it is now to sort of come from nowhere to play Premiership rugby. And I've sort of never really been the nervous type either. So I wasn't sort of throwing up or anything before the game. It was just actually it was my first game for Saracens was a midweek game. We played an Anglo-Welsh game. Back then we had a league on a Saturday, and then there was an Anglo-Welsh tournament on a Wednesday. And my first start off the bench was against Caerphilly on a Wednesday night in North Wales. Very wet, very windy, in a cow field with about 15 Welshmen trying to kill the Englishmen. So it was a bit of a baptism of fire. But like I say, it was enjoyable. I was ready for it, and it was. I was comfortable, I suppose, is what I'm saying.
Yeah. So you mentioned obviously Michael Lynagh and other international players. How much did you take from them in terms of professional wise and the way that they actually conducted themselves?
Yeah, that was a massive eye opener for me, and I took loads out of it. And still, all the way through my career, I was still learning off the best players because I was fortunate enough to play with and against them. And it just astonished me that you watch guys on TV and you think, oh, they're good. They must be just good. There's nothing behind it. There's no secret behind it. They're just good players. They're gifted, whatever you want to call it. But then you see the work they put in, and those two guys you mentioned there, Michael Lynagh and Philippe Sellard, were just in an amateur era where I think Michael was in property, and I don't remember what Philippe did in France. They managed to train almost as hard as guys train these days, and they were certainly, in terms of being fit and prepared, they were as fit and prepared as players are now. They perhaps weren't the same size as they are now, but in terms of ready to play rugby, they were astonishing. And watching them in training, how they trained, how they I wouldn't say they trained like it was a match, but they certainly trained a lot harder than I'd seen anyone train. They were focused, they were concentrating. There was no dead time. They were just on it for an hour and a half and then switched off, and they were great guys off the field. But then once they crossed back onto the whitewash or into the gym or whatever it was, just so professional, which was a real eye-opener for me. And actually, I think that's probably true for most of the game over here, because it generally went professional overnight. So no one had sat you down as an 18, 17, 15-year-old saying, look, this is how you've got to be professional. You've got to do this, X, Y, Z. People were very much sort of suck it and see. We'll just find out as we go along. And same with coaches. Coaches, as I said, Mark Evans was a teacher. No one taught him how to be a professional rugby coach. So he was learning on the job. And it was all very much to say, sort of find it out as you go along. And then these guys came in and sort of showed a lot of us what it took to be at the top, what it took to be to maximise your skills, to improve week after week and play at the very, very highest level. And I mean, Francois Pinard came in a couple of months after I joined, around Christmas '96, I think that was. He brought another level entirely, because during the apartheid era in the 80s and up to the mid 90s, South Africa had been fully professional. So they'd been isolated away from international competition, but they had professional leagues all that time. So they were probably 10 years further down the line in terms of being a developed professional sport. So he came in with ideas on training and nutrition and lifestyle and things like rest and relaxation and all this sort of stuff that it was almost like listening to someone speaking Greek. You're like, what? I understand what you mean. So watching those and learning from those guys was absolute gold for me as a young player, and I took a huge amount. I wouldn't have made it as a full-time professional without those sort of influences early on.
Yeah, so moving on just a few more years. So you left Saracens in 2000. What sort of made you want to make that decision? Was it forced upon you, or was it chosen on you?
Well, it was again a sort of bit of an unusual situation. Really. I'd played for Saracens for 4 years, joined in '96, and certainly the last 3 years of my career, I'd been a regular first choice player there. And I think I played something like 90 odd games in 3 years. So quite a lot of rugby in a very short period of time. Very little rest between seasons. And again, early professionalism. Sometimes we'd play our first league game middle of August, and then we play our last league game end of May, beginning of June. And then I went on an England tour as well in '98. So I had about 2 weeks off between seasons that year. The following season, probably about 3 weeks off. So looking back, I'd probably say these days I'd say I was burnt out. I needed a break. Back then, I was bored. I was not really enjoying what I was doing. Training was becoming more and more of a chore. The games were fun. Don't get me wrong, I still enjoyed playing. The money was great. I enjoyed getting paid, but I didn't feel that I could be carried. I could just. I'd been offered a contract by Saracens for the next year. I didn't feel I could sign it because I didn't feel that I'd be able to give 100%. I didn't want to let people down, so I went and spoke to Francois, who was the head coach and probably sort of director of rugby at that sort of time, again without having that title. And I said to him, look, I'm not really, my head's not in this. I need to sort of step away while I can. And he sort of tried to convince me, I suppose, but I think he understood as well that where my head was, it was probably more detrimental to stay than to let me go. So I didn't sign the new contract. I let that drop, and I took a sabbatical again. I guess these days you call it sabbatical, but back then I honestly didn't really know what I was going to do. I sort of had some ideas about going away for a year, a bit of travelling, and perhaps living abroad for a spell. Again, with a bit of perspective, the sort of the state of the professional game at the time was still very fluid. It wasn't really settled, so there was no guarantee that professional rugby would carry on. It was almost heading into a bit of a civil war at the time, as it happened, it did. So it wasn't a case of if I don't play here, that's it, I'm doomed. I was still quite young. I could have retrained. I could have carried on at university, whatever. So I had sort of a lot of, I wouldn't say options. They weren't necessarily options, but I saw a lot of ideas of what I could do, and actually not many of them really staying involved in rugby. So I took a bit of a break, did a bit of travelling. Was fortunate enough to go out to Sydney for the Olympics in 2000. So I was out there for a month. And then my wife, my girlfriend back then, was working in America for a year teaching. So I went to stay with her for a month. And then I got back to the UK. So I left the UK in sort of about June 2000. Got back at the end of November, beginning of December. And a friend of mine who had been my agent previously, he'd sort of been putting my name around the circuit, not behind my back, but without me sort of knowing really, because I wasn't thinking that way. And a couple of clubs were interested and wanted to have a chat with me, and one of them was Leicester. And I thought, actually, if I'm going to get back into the sport, which I was sort of thinking I'd been a bit refreshed, I'd like to go somewhere different. I'd like to have a change. I wouldn't want to just slip back into the old role at Saracens. So came up to meet with Dean Richards and John Wells, who were coaching at Leicester at the time, and Dean was my hero as a player, so I sort of sat down in front of him in an office. He said, I really want you here. I think because I played against Leicester 9 or 10 times and actually had a couple of good games and played with a few of the England guys from Leicester, so they sort of knew me. So his Dean Richards telling me, we'd like you to come and play for us. And I basically said, where do I sign? And that's sort of, again, it was a haphazard way in which I joined Leicester.
So yeah, you mentioned you went on this sabbatical. When you were travelling, was there any sort of consideration that you might not return to the UK?
Yeah, definitely. I left rugby without really thinking about coming back to it. I'd gone as far as speaking to Parramatta Rugby Club in Sydney, and they were going to get me a job and help me find somewhere to live, and I was going to play for them, which was, I think they were semi-pro, may even have been amateur, but with sort of helping foreign players to come over and play. So I'd spoken to them on the phone a handful of times. I went over there while I was in Sydney in 2000. I stopped over to the rugby club and met the coach and met some of the players, and had a look around the facility. It was great, exactly what I wanted. But I got home and there were a few things that sort of happened in my private life and my family life that really sort of put the kibosh on me going abroad for an extended period. And as I say, when I got back, my sort of attitude had changed a bit, and this message from Leicester wanting to meet sort of really piqued my interest, and the rest is history. But yeah, for what was I out of the game for 6-7 months? I barely thought about it. I didn't really watch much on TV. Watched a lot of rugby league in Australia because that's what was on. Didn't do any sort of sport watching in America, and just sort of bummed around a bit, which was great, and completely didn't train, didn't follow the sport at all, which again, with the benefit of hindsight, was brilliant, because it gave me a real genuine break, and I sort of came back, and it helped me. It refreshed me. I certainly wouldn't have played in 18 years without having a year off. I don't think, not the way I was going.
Would you recommend it to a young player who sort of is going through what you had to go through?
Well, yeah, I would and I wouldn't, but I keep harking back. This is not the same as it is now. So back then, I was out of the game for the best part of a year, I suppose. I joined Leicester in December 2000. I didn't really play for them until late January, early February. So probably eight or 9 months out of the game. Now, if you're injured, that happens these days. But if you're just sort of spending 7 months on the pop and just eating and drinking whatever you want, that's not a great way of going about it these days. And I think you find it very tough to get back into modern professional sport in general, I suppose, but certainly through my experience, rugby, because it evolves every year, it changes so quickly. So if you're out of the game for an extended period, particularly if you walk away from the game and don't keep yourself on fit and all that, I think it's very tough to get back in unless you're a very, very good player. But having said that, if you get afforded the luxury of having a bit of a break sometime in the middle of a season or between seasons, I couldn't recommend it high enough. It's a tough career. It's a tough job. You really are on a treadmill. It's every year's the same, almost every week's the same. It can be quite mentally grinding, and the more you can get away from that when you can, the better, I think.
Absolutely. So you mentioned you joined Leicester Tigers and you actually went on to spend the rest of your career there. Was it an immediate thought when you came to the club that it's somewhere you could stay for an extended period?
Yeah, well, I mean, I always wanted to stay at Saracens. I didn't want to leave Saracens in terms of go and play for another club. And in fact, Leicester would have been the last club I would have played for. We had a very, very intense rivalry. They still do have a very intense rivalry. But Saracens were very much a sort of the new money in the Premiership, and Leicester were the old guard. So, we had I played against them 9 or 10 times, and they're all big ding-dongs. So it wasn't my ambition to play for Leicester by any means. But I did enjoy the thought of staying at a club. And once I got up here, I spent a couple of weeks here. I thought, actually, this is great. This club suits me. I suit it. It was very different to what I was used to. Very different to Saracens in many ways. Obviously, living up here is very different as well. But I took to it very quickly. And over the 14 years here, I had some interest from elsewhere. But nothing major because I never really pursued any other options. When my contract came up for renewal, the club were good and they sort of got negotiations in pretty early. People were like, I want to go play in France, new challenge, more money, blah, blah. I'm like, well, yeah, I've never gone anywhere for the money. I've always gone for the challenge of the rugby. And I had enough of a challenge here every week in, week out to sort of keep me on my toes. So I never felt the need to try and sort of bump my price up and go and play abroad or whatever. I was fortunate enough to go and play with England as well. So all in all, I think I sort of again symptomatic of everything I've done. I sort of fell into a really good situation up here and made the best of it. So no, I never seriously thought about leaving here once I joined that.
Absolutely. So you went on to have a lot of success with Leicester, which we'll move on to. But we'll talk about England first. So you mentioned when you first wanted to get into rugby, playing for England was a goal for you. And when you got the first call to go to the England senior squad, what was your feeling?
That would have been sort of 97. So I played for... So that was my first full season playing at Saracens as first choice. And we had a really good season. We ended up finishing second in the league that year. But so early in 97 season, I played pretty well again against Leicester, actually. I had a couple of games against Leicester in 97. One of them, I think actually two of them were on TV. Yeah, one was on Boxing Day. So I got my sort of foot in the door with England. I got noticed by the press a bit. And so I ended up playing in the Six Nations in 98. So it'd been 97, 98 season, but it'd been sort of February, March 1998. I've been involved in England training, obviously, before that for the Autumn Internationals, and that was quite sort of surreal. I knew quite a lot of the guys from obviously the Leicester guys, a couple of Saracens guys involved. So I enjoyed the training with England, but it was all very much come down for a couple of days, train, then go back to your club and then watch the game on TV, basically. Play for your club and watch England on TV. But then during the Six Nations in 98, I started getting more and more involved with the first team, and I was actually quite close to getting a cap in a couple of the games. Just there were some injury doubts about some people who managed to sort of pass last-minute fitness tests. But I played 4 games for the A team in the Five Nations in '98, and then I went on tour in the summer of '98 with England, and it was everything I expected it to be. I'd sort of built up in my head a bit because I had wanted to play for England for a very long time, and then just being involved, getting all the kit, watching, having a look around the changing room when you're getting ready for training, seeing some of the blokes you watch on TV, was a great thing, absolutely great buzz for me, and I think it raised my game. I was probably mentally not ready for international rugby at that stage, but it was a great sort of eye opener for me to see again how the best players do it, and I got to learn from some of those guys. I was fortunate enough to be playing at the same club as quite a few of them, but it's always great seeing other great players and how they sort of conduct themselves, what they do for, like I say, nutrition, or what do you have for breakfast, and what do you do in the evening, how do you relax, how do you switch off from rugby. That was great. People like Leonard and Galalio and these sort of guys who I didn't know as club mates. I sort of got to know them a bit on those sort of training weeks and whatever. And, I think if I'd played for England in that sort of period in '98, I don't think I'd have been ready to take the chance. And I think I probably would have not failed, but I don't think I'd done myself any favour. And I probably would have disappeared for a bit. So actually, looking back, it was probably quite good for my career that I didn't play too young, too early.
Yeah, so talk to me about your first try for England. What was going through your head when it happened?
I'll just turn my light on.
No problem.
Unfortunately, I only scored one try for England, but it was on my first start. So we went to we toured Australia in 2006 in June in the summer, and I was on the bench for the first test in Sydney. Came off the bench with about 20, 25 to go and played quite well. I had quite a good impact on the game, although we lost quite heavily. So I started the next week in Melbourne, and I began to play pretty well. We were beaten by about 40 to 20, but I was one of our better players and scored a try. As I came around the corner, and genuinely it was about 40 metres out. I sort of threw a dummy, and Matt Rogers, their fly half, bought this dummy, and I went through his gap. One of my mates blocked the inside defender and made a nice big hole. Had to be a big hole for me. I actually got it, sprinted in from about 35, 40 metres. And as I got to about 10 metres away from the line, I could hear these footsteps behind me. I couldn't hear anything else. It was all really quiet. And the MCG is a huge stadium. It's about 100,000 capacity. I don't think 100,000 in, but it's a huge stadium. And there's quite a big distance between the field and the stand. So it was almost like running in a field somewhere in the middle of nowhere. It was dead quiet. I heard these footsteps behind me. So got about 5 yards out from the line. I tried to dive. I'm not getting caught from behind. So I dived, sort of rolled over. Bit of a crap dive, if I'm honest. And as I dotted the ball down, I rolled over and I saw it was the Australian Titan who I'd sort of gassed on the outside. He was about 15 metres behind me. A really terrible dive for no reason. But yeah, I mean, it was surreal. I broke through the line, and so I was looking. There must be a fullback somewhere. There must be someone to come to tackle me. And I just carried on running, and suddenly I heard these footsteps. So it was all very, very strange. But it was nice to score a try from the country, just the one.
Yeah. You mentioned like the MCG and the stadiums. I've always been interested in how sportsmen sort of block it out.
Yeah.
So how did you cope with like large crowds in that respect?
It sounds boring, really, but you just get on with it. It's not. I think that people get certainly in my experience, people who get influenced by the occasion, by the crowd, and by whether it's a big game or not. I think they're the people that are a little bit insecure in their preparation. They're probably asking themselves, "Am I good to play here? Do I know everything? Do I know all the calls? Do I know everything I've got to do?" And I said earlier, I'm not really a nervous person in general. I never got nervous for exams or driving tests or anything like that. It's not who I am. But I think I did prepare very well for all my games, and I went into games knowing my job and knowing what I need to do in the sort of grand scheme of things. So actually going out in front of a big crowd or going out in front of no crowd, it didn't really faze me because I was focused on what I had to do. That sounds a bit flippant. It's not. I'm not better than everyone else, but that's just the way I see it. And I think nervous people, rightly or wrongly, they have doubts about what they're going to do. And generally, Johnny Wilkinson was one of the most nervous players I've ever known. and that guy could not have ticked any more boxes. He could not have been more prepared. But part of his psyche was he had this doubt about himself, so he got nervous, and he was not a vomiter, but he was very close to being a vomiter before a game, every game. So I think people just sort of that's that mindset. I was fortunate enough to be, I suppose you call it a bit more confidence. I'd have a bit more confidence in myself, but it sounds crazy when you compare myself to Johnny Wilkinson, saying I'm more confident than he is, and he's 10 times the player I was. But I think that's the interesting part about the mental side of sport. It's sometimes, in fact, a lot of times, sport's about kidding yourself. It's about sort of trying to tell yourself it's not a big game, or trying to tell yourself you're not under the spotlight here. It's all sort of kidding yourself, and perhaps I was able to kid myself a bit more than some were. But no, don't get me wrong. I always had time, always made time to appreciate a crowd, to look around, because I don't know if anyone actually told me this, but it's something I picked up fairly early. Is you ask all these sort of former players, and a lot of them are, I wish I'd sort of took it in the occasion more. So, before games, before big games in particular, but before most games, you sort of have a quiet sort of walk around the ground, whether it's in your warm-up or whatever, just sort of take in the atmosphere, have a bit of a jaw with some of the away supporters or whatever it is, because that's important. I think as professional sportsmen, you're very privileged to be in that situation. Of course, you work hard for it, but you're very privileged to be in that situation where there's a big atmosphere, it's a big occasion, and sort of the spotlight's on you. So actually stop and enjoy it, stop and smell the roses, as it were. I think that's far more, for me, that's far more important than just sort of tunnel vision and sort of block everything out and focus.
Yeah, so on to your success with Leicester. Obviously, you spent the rest of your career there. What moments in particular would you pinpoint as your favourite moments, and why?
It's a common question, I think, and my answer is probably almost always the same. I was fortunate enough to play in a lot of games, play in quite a few big games, and probably more importantly, play with some fantastic people. And I think those games where you're, it's not necessarily an individual thing. I can think of some games where I played well as an individual, but the best memories I have are of team performances where we're underdogs, or we're going away to a team with loads on the line on the result, and we come out with the result and win. Those sort of games are far more memorable and special to me. So I mean, we played Munster in the European Cup in 2007, January 2007 it was. And they beat us in the first round back in October, whatever it was. We lost at home at Welford Road, which was quite rare back then, very rare back then, in fact. So we needed to beat Munster away to qualify for the quarterfinals. And Munster had never lost the European Cup game at the old Thomond Park. So we were going in there. We had to win the game. This is the last game they were playing there before it got all ripped down and rebuilt. So it was a huge emotional factor for them. It was a wet, cold, windy, typical Limerick night, and really hostile crowd. We got off the bus, and we'd had a really, really good week's training. Now, again, this is a bit what I was saying earlier. I think we were just calm because we knew exactly what we were going to do. We knew how we were going to try and play. There was that sort of feeling across the squad that if we play how we've trained, we'll win this game, regardless of what the history books say about Munster at Thomond Park. We went out there and we played. We scored 2 tries in really foul weather. Controlled the game out Munster and won 13-7. And that to me was one of the most perfect games I've been involved in terms of the squad or team performance, because everything right. All defence was great. The scrum, we scrummaged really well. Line out under huge pressure was great. We scored 2 tries, denied them anything, and really upset their party for the closing of the Old Thomond. And then we had a great night in Limerick afterwards as well. They're quite memorable, although that's slightly less memorable than the game before. But yeah, that was great. But then I could pick probably a dozen games over the years where, particularly sort of European Cup games for some reason, they tend to bring out that little bit more edge. But we go down to teams in France and no one would give us a hope, and we come away with a win, or big semi-finals and quarter-finals. Again, I consider myself very fortunate to be involved in those games, and it is very difficult just sort of plucking one out and saying that's the best.
Absolutely. So before we finish your career, and in that respect, we'll talk about the World Cup final. So what was that? It must sort of been mixed emotions really for you in that respect.
Yeah, well, I mean, I was on the bench, so it is a completely different situation. I mean, I used to laugh and put, oh yeah, you got to take, if you're on the bench, you take it seriously because your guy could get injured after the first minute and you could be on. I think I played for about 450 odd games. I think I've seen someone get injured in the first minute about twice. So it just, you're sitting there and a coach like, come on, just get ready for it. Heads in, everyone in. You're like, oh, do you know what? Just give me a minute. I'm not really on for at least 45 minutes. So the build up was better. And again, as I said earlier, I took some time to go outside in the Stade de France and take in the atmosphere because, I mean, I'm probably never going to go to another World Cup as a spectator, let alone as a player. So it was a case of, let's just make sure you remember this and enjoy this. So warming up and sort of took in the atmosphere. The sort of pre-game stuff was quite heavy, and there was a bit of nerves, has to be said, because we weren't expected to be in that situation. So some of the guys, even against some of the guys who'd been involved in 2003, they had some nerves because this is the World Cup final. It's not just another game. You try and tell yourself it's another game, but it's not. But for me, sitting on the bench, it was a bit more relaxed, and just sort of watched it and got on the field eventually. And by that time, you're in that zone, you're in that concentration zone. So it was unusual. And then obviously we lost. So you go from the euphoria of the week before, we beat the French in the semi-final, the whole build up to the World Cup, this is it, blah, 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 and then you lose. Suddenly it's like someone's taking your balloon and squeezed all the air out of it. But again, the situation we were in, I think we knew we were fairly fortunate to be there. Actually, a game like that, you might think devastate you for weeks, months, years. I didn't take it that way. I don't think many of us did, because it was we were above and beyond where we expected to be. Actually, we didn't deserve to win. We weren't the best team on the day. We certainly weren't the best team in the tournament or in the world rankings at that time. So we gave it a crack. We if we had a bounce of the ball here, a decision there, whatever, we might have won it, but we didn't. So let's just enjoy what we achieved, which was incredible, really. So again, we put it all behind us fairly quickly. And moved on, whether it was moved on for the evening or whether it was moved on the week afterwards. I had an operation the week afterwards on my knee, so I was out of the game for about 3 weeks after that. So I had a bit of time just to sort of let the dust settle, and then I went back in and was playing for Leicester within a month. So it was a great. And again, at the time, it was probably quite hard. And you get to a final, you want to win it, and losing finals are quite sort of. Unfortunately, I've had more than my fair share. But when you lose a final, it is disappointing. It's not as disappointing, I have to say, as losing a semi-final, which just seems strange. But losing a final is pretty gutting. But then, with the benefit of hindsight now, I've got 13 years away from it, and all I do is see the positives. We had a really good bond as a squad. We weren't particularly great as players, as individuals, and even as a team for the first couple of games. And we dragged it together, we pulled it together, and ended up in a World Cup final. And there's not many people in the sport can say that. So I look back on it with nothing but fond memories now. And it would have been great to win, but I say we didn't deserve it. So that's it.
Yeah. So 7 years after that, you decided to hang up your boots. Was it a difficult decision psychologically for you, or was it sort of physiologically it had to happen?
Yeah, I mean, this is a good subject. I think the topic of retirement and when to retire is always going to be tough for sports people, because as I alluded to earlier, you spend a lot of your time saying, "I feel fine. I'm good. I can do this. I can make that. I can train like this." Blah blah. And to a large extent, you can. But the older you get, the more the spirit's willing. The flesh is unfortunately weak. And I had started having fairly bad back problems from. Well, before that World Cup, actually, sort of mid 2000s, late 2000s, I was struggling with a back, so that was nagging on me. And then for the last 2 years of my career, it was pretty bad. And I probably should have called it a day a year before, to be honest. But the way things turned out with the club, they asked me to do another year, and I was having a benefit year as well. So it worked out quite well. So I came back for another year, but I mean, I only played half a dozen games in that final year. And it got to the stage. I would always said to myself, when you stop enjoying the job, that's the time to start to walk away. And I was always adamant all the way through my sort of my my pomp, I suppose. I was always like that. As soon as you stop enjoying it, I enjoyed it all the time, and I had some low points, had some real disappointing times, being dropped and being. Unfortunately, I wasn't too injured, but things like losing that World Cup, I had some really low points. But at the same time, I still enjoyed what I did. Got to the stage at the end of my career, and this would have been probably something like February, March 2014. And I got out of bed one Monday morning. I played about 15 minutes of the weekend, so not a lot of rugby. And I just sort of had to roll out of bed. I couldn't stand up properly. I had to come down the stairs backwards, and everything was hurting: knees, Achilles, back, neck, shoulder. Everything was hurting. I sort of sat down dinner at the kitchen table, in fact here, and I just had a coffee. And I was like, "What are you doing? Is this fun? Are you enjoying this?" I've got to go into work, so I went into work, and on the way in, I had about a 45-minute drive. But then where we live is about 45 minutes away from the club. So on that drive in, I pretty much decided that I was going to call it a day, and went and spoke to Richard Cockle and the doctor as well. Had some scans from the week before to look at, and I mean, I'd sort of made my mind up by the time I got into the club, but they were sort of like, "Well, what are you thinking about?" The doctor looked at my scans, and he said, "Well, do you know what? Your back's pretty bad. I can't recommend you carry on. It's not for me to call you to tell you to retire, but that's my medical recommendation." And I retired within 3 weeks, and that was it. And it was a relatively easy decision at the end. I was anticipating it being far harder. And particularly when I was sort of late 20s, early 30s, I was like, I really don't want to leave this. This is great fun. I'm enjoying this. This is a dream job. Someone's paying me to do a hobby I'd be doing anyway. But at the end, it just got to the case where I was not able to train as well as I wanted to, and training was something I did well. I never missed training. I was always loved training, gym, outside, fitness, whatever it was, rugby. I loved it, and I just couldn't do that for that last sort of season and a half, I suppose. And so it sort of almost got forced upon me physiologically, as you said, but mentally more than anything, I'd sort of had it, and I said to myself all along, you're not enjoying it, so there's only one answer here. And that was it, and I was comfortable with that. I played for 18 years, and I had sort of no plans to be a professional rugby player for 18 years, but it happened. Played a lot of games and did everything I wanted to do and achieve what I wanted to achieve. So actually walking away from the game was surprisingly easy for me at the end. And I mean, I did a bit of corporate work for Leicester the year after I finished. And I thought over the summer, that first game I do back at Watford Road, where I go and sit in the stands and talk to people at dinner, blah, blah. That was sort of I'll know then if I made the right decision. And I sat there, I watched this first 20 minutes of the game, and not once did I think, I wish I was out there. And to me, that said, made the right decision. And I haven't missed it for a second since then. And that's 6 years now. So, it was a surprise how. I mean, it wasn't. I'm not going to say it's easy, because I still had to work out what I was going to do. I fortunately had some time to put in some work on coaching badges and speaking to people about getting some work afterwards. And I was doing some afternoon speaking as well, which sort of I'd gotten into. So it was hard work preparing, I suppose, for what was going to happen next. And I'm probably still preparing, to be honest. I'm not really, I wouldn't really say I've completely moved on and settled a new career. But actually, the physical decision of moving away and leaving the game was relatively easy then.
Yeah, and so you've stayed involved with the game since. Is it something that you plan to do for the rest of your working career?
I think so. Yeah, I do. I enjoy the game. I didn't enjoy it. I'd say right at the end of it. It was becoming more of a chore than a job, and actually having a bit of time away from it. I coached. So I retired in sort of May 2014, and then I got a job at Loughborough University in September. And I coached at Loughborough University for 3 years, and that was fantastic. That sort of really gave me time to get over the game and get my head around the coaching side of it, which is completely different to playing, obviously. And then once I started coaching there, I thought, actually, this is good. I do enjoy coaching. I wasn't so sure towards the end of my career. Everyone was like, you should just go to coaching, do the academy or whatever. I'm like, I'm not really sure. It's not something I've desperately wanted to do. But I got into it and really enjoyed it. And so I think I don't. Certainly not at the moment. I'm not desperate to get into rugby full time as a coach, or professional rugby full time as a coach, or any sort of capacity. But I do enjoy doing so. I mean, now I do a bit of throwing and scrum coaching with the England Roses, England women's team. I do a bit of throwing coaching with Coventry Rugby Club. I still sort of try and do a little bit of this and that here and there, a little bit of sort of ad hoc coaching rather than anything full time. But I want to stay involved in that respect, and on the side of that, I do quite a bit of events and hospitality with the company I work with. So it's a nice mix of, I still get to see some of the old guys when we sit down and have lunches and sporting lunches in London and tell the old stories and stuff like that. So it's great to sort of keep seeing the old mates again, and I still get a sort of rugby fix from the coaching. And I suppose the plus side is it gives me a bit more time to watch it at the weekend, as opposed to when you're coaching a team, you're out all day Saturday, you're out coaching in the week, and it's actually nice to be at home a bit.
Yeah, and finally, how's the current situation sort of affected you, both mentally and potentially physically as well?
Yeah, it has been relatively tough. I mean, towards the beginning of the lockdown, actually my sort of life didn't change too much. But my work was earlier in the week. I had a bit of coaching here and there on sort of a Monday or Tuesday morning, and then we'd have lunches and dinners out there, primarily sort of Thursdays and Fridays in London. So I was home a lot, and my wife works full time, so I'm sort of semi-running the house, or trying to run the house. So actually, it didn't change too much. But then once the events had to pack up and everything closed down, you just sort of end up sort of stuck indoors. And I'm sure many people in the country are in the same boat as me. You can't work from home if you're in events and hospitality. So you just end up sitting around, walk the dog, cook dinner, whatever it is. And it certainly after about 4 weeks, the novelty wore off. You initially actually it's not too bad. You sit at home, watch a bit of TV, and have a few drinks in the evening. That's it, great. And then you do that for 4 weeks, and suddenly it's like, oh my God, so I want to do something else. I want to actually do some work. So I mean, it's been tough. What's been a godsend for me is actually the golf courses have opened up. So I've been out playing golf 2 or 3 times a week, which has been great. Just get outside and escape the 4 walls of the house. But yeah, it is tough. I think I do feel for people who I've been fortunate enough to work. The company I work with have been really good in terms of the wages and stuff. So I'm still getting a bit of money from them. I say my wife's working full time, so that situation has been great. But it's been a really tough period. And I don't think anyone really expected it to be that tough at all. People back in the inside, you've got to stay at home now for the next 4 or 5 weeks, whatever it was at the time. But that's all right, that's all right. But it seems we're pretty thin. I think most people are ready to get back out there and do some proper work again.
Absolutely. I think that's a good way to close us off. Thank you very much, George, for joining me on TotalSport. Where can we find you on Twitter, Instagram, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, on Twitter, George_Chuter. I do a bit of tweeting, nothing sensible at all. I am on Instagram. I don't really use Instagram, so that's point on point. But yeah, I'm on Twitter.
Yeah, go drop George a follow and go drop us a follow. This is the first we're filming after the rebrand, so thank you very much for sticking around. Thanks again, George, and we will see you next time.
No problem. Cheers, Chris.